Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Rosh Hashanah edition of Majority Rules. Thank you for being with us. And we really wanted to have this conversation today. For those of you observing, Happy New Year. I hope you've had some apples and honey and challah, as I did, probably too much. It's sitting like a brick in my stomach. But anyway, we really wanted to have this incredibly timely and important conversation. For those of you who have been watching Majority Rules all year, and then especially this week, we have been going deep on a number of issues, most relevant to women, but important for everybody, that have been coming up in the presidential election. We did Monday's show on sort of what was next for abortion politics and had an amazing conversation, which if you haven't seen, go to YouTube, to the two-way page on YouTube and watch it with Alexis McGill-Johnson and Amanda Becker of the 19th. Talking about sort of what's happening in that space and what the future looks like for abortion legislation. But the other topic, which, I got to say, and I'm going to cue my friend Reshma in a minute, because I did not have it on my bingo card, to be really honest, that childcare was actually going to be a focus of the 2024 election in the way that it has been, and it should be. Because when you see some of the numbers that illustrate the sort of pain and suffering that Americans are experiencing around childcare, they're really, when we talk about inflation and we talk about the economy, two of the biggest underlying issues of the economy, one is housing, but the other one is absolutely childcare, which has been growing in cost and burden for American families for a long time. And one of the reasons why this issue has become such an important part of the presidential debate, discussion, campaign is because of our guest tonight, my dear friend Reshma Saujani, who founded Moms First, and because of the great reporting of women like Chabeli, Carranza of the 19th, who've been following what's been happening around the country. Now, in some ways, the childcare challenge, it's always been there. When the United States and many other nations shifted workplace laws, enabled it to be possible for women to return for especially white women to join the workforce in large numbers. What the United States failed to do, that most other Western nations did, was we never invested in childcare infrastructure as more American women were entering the workforce beginning in the 70s and 80s. We never did what Western Europe did, which was to build, federal funds for childcare, infrastructure, et cetera. We've never done it. And in the pandemic, I think many Americans discovered that actually the only safety net for American families was basically moms not working. And it has been, I think, a rude awakening, not just through the pandemic, how broken our system is, but frankly, how broken it continues to be. And to ground our conversation, first of all, I want you all to participate tonight. And as always, the rules on two-way are peace, love, and understanding. We're going to have a totally respectful conversation. This is an issue that honestly is completely nonpartisan. It doesn't matter what you vote, who you vote for, where you live. If you have, and I will say, I think we should expand this not just to be about childcare, but also elder care, which is also a huge issue in this country as we have a graying population and, tremendous challenges. Many women who don't have kids are still dealing with other burdens of care like elder care because of the sort of lack of infrastructure. So just want to level set that we will talk about all of that. And I don't want to exclude anyone who's not a primary child caregiver from this conversation because there are so many issues. But I want to, like I always do, just throw up a couple charts, kind of ground this conversation, not just in how we all feel. And I think many of us have personal experiences with this on a daily basis, but also like really what is happening in the country today. You're going to see me taking on and off my glasses because I am blind without them, but they don't look very good. So forgive me. Okay. So first chart, and this is from our friends at the National Women's Law Center. 51% of Americans, so more than half of all Americans, live in a childcare desert. That means that just like when we talk about healthcare deserts, people that live beyond a certain driving distance from a hospital or from a medical provider, that is also true now for over half of Americans have no viable childcare within a reasonable distance of their home. That's crazy. And that means that does exclude, grandparents, et cetera, that as, JD Vance referenced people getting the grandparents, obviously we understand lots of Americans do not live anywhere near relatives who would be in a position to help them, or don't have family members who could take care of their children even if they wanted to. Let's look at the next chart. So 51%. Now, here's the second problem that we have that's facing so many Americans, and that is, oh, sorry, somebody asked where the chart's from. It's hard to see. I don't know if we can put it full screen, but we can also drop the link to it in the chat if anyone wants to see it. My team has the link, but it's from, I believe these are all from the Department of Health and Human Services. They're federal numbers, but they're also put out in a report by the National Women's Law Center, which is where I think I found it. So anyway, so what families should be spending on childcare is about 7% of their income. And this is actually something I really want to talk about because this has come up a bit in the campaign. So a reasonable amount of money for families to be spending on childcare is 7%. Unfortunately, most families, the actual cost is more like 24%. And we've got 84% of Americans that are now spending more than 10% of their income on childcare. That's a crazy number. So you combine that with housing, childcare is up there among the top costs. And then the last chart, which I wanted to share, can we see the last one? And this is just how difficult it is, right? The median yearly income for childcare workers, the poverty level versus the rest of Americans. And this is one of the big problems, is that it is basically poverty wages to care for children. And the reason is because, and we'll talk about this with our experts, is because it is just so incredibly expensive and difficult to sustain childcare as a business. It's not a very profitable business. And that is why in so many places around the world that have better childcare, it's federally subsidized because it's a very hard business to maintain. So a little background there. I'm not going to talk for too long. I want to bring in Reshma and Chabeli, who know way more about this than me. I really know this issue more from like my life. And I live in a very, high cost childcare area. And, it's been an enormous burden for my family as it has been for pretty much everyone I know. But let's start. So Reshma, you had this whole other life working on women in tech. And I think you had like a massive revelation during the pandemic that like childcare was like one of the biggest issues holding women and families back. And so you've spent the last few years doing nothing but like beating the drum and like literally standing in front of, literally showing up at an event with Donald Trump to ask him the question and then making sure that it has now been in the debates, which is amazing that we've had childcare questions in all the debates. I think a lot of that is thanks to you. So what do we need to know about the terrible state of things that I maybe didn't cover, or that is the reason that you get out of bed every day to work on this?
Well, I mean, I spent the past, 13 years of my life building an organization called Girls Who Code. I was having my second child in the pandemic. My son was born on January 25th and the world shut down on March 8th. And I think my first aha moment on this issue came as like an educator. So, half my students at Girls Who Code are under the poverty line. Many of them are Black and brown. And so many of them that September were supposed to be on their way to college. But because their mothers were essential workers, our teachers, our nurses, people that kept our city thriving, or alive, functioning, I should say, because our mothers were essential workers and schools were shut down during the pandemic and daycare centers were shut down and your grandparents couldn't come in because you didn't want to get them sick. So many of my students couldn't go to college because they had to stay home and take care of their siblings. So I really saw how this generational cycle of poverty affects girls because we have a broken structure of care. We often see this problem in other countries in Africa and India, but I mean, it's happening right here in Brooklyn, right? Like everywhere. And so that was a big aha moment for me. And I think the second aha moment for me, and I think you touched on it a little bit, was as a mother. I had thought for so long that if I was struggling to both be a mom and be a worker, that I married the wrong guy. You know what I mean? Or, he just didn't do enough of the laundry or the caregiving of the children, or I wasn't balancing things in the right way, because when I looked on Instagram, it just seemed like everybody had it all figured out.
Well, Instagram is
Right.
obviously
It's
the
always a lie.
perfectly accurate representation of the
Yeah.
world around us. Yep, yep, yep.
But I think because in the pandemic, for those of us who were able to work from home, your Zoom screen saw everybody's reality, which
Mm,
was that the fact that most of us as mothers were still doing two-thirds of the caregiving work. And
mm,
we were doing this juggling act that we've always been doing, but we were doing it out loud and in front of one another. And so I think
mm,
moms of America had this collective aha, wait a minute, it's not me. I'm not broken. The system is broken. And
mm.
that we could keep fighting for gender equality. But if we didn't have structural support, if we didn't have childcare and paid leave, we were never going to get to equality.
Yeah.
And so is that, the fact that the United States is the only industrialized nation that doesn't have paid leave, and 1 out of 4 women go back to work, 2 weeks after having a baby. Lauren, I speak at a lot of events, and oftentimes I'll ask a question to the room and I'll say, how many of you went back to work before you were ready? And almost every hand is raised. And you just
Mm,
don't recover from that. And the
mm.
second thing is the fact that we are the wealthiest nation that puts the least amount of money in childcare. 40% of parents are in debt because of the cost of childcare. For the first
It's a
time,
crazy number.
parents are paying more for childcare of 2 children than they are for mortgages in every single state. So in a
Wow.
presidential election where we're talking about inflation, we're talking about the price of gas and the price of eggs, what's really the most expensive thing on families' balance sheet is childcare.
Yeah.
And so that needed
If
to,
you can find it, if you can find
if
it,
you can even find it, right?
if you can even find it, which is, I think, why that chart, that 51%, the like childcare desert chart was really striking to me. Is like, it's not, we're not imagining it. Like, it actually is really, really hard to find
Yeah.
decent
I mean,
childcare in
I have
most
a
places.
Absolutely. I mean, I have people who work with me at Moms First and Girls Who Code who live in towns where, they don't have babysitters or nannies, or the wait list for the daycare center is like, 24 people long. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, hey, whatever you need to do, figure it out. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If they're, doing, watching Grizzly and Lemons, at 4 o'clock or we're on a call, I don't care. But most people don't have that from their employers, you
Right.
know?
And certainly if you have to leave the home to do your job, that's a whole other story. So Chabeli, tell us about what you like in your reporting. And I've talked a lot about on this show about how much I love the 19th. And if you all are not subscribers to the 19th, you really should be. It's a nonprofit newsroom that focuses on women's issues. It's so fantastic. And they go deep on all kinds of stuff. It's like my Bible. And only a place like the 19th would have a full-time childcare reporter. Although I think there's one at the Washington Post too. But anyway, the point is, you do it better. So, as you've been doing this work over the last few years, what are the things that have really stood out to you in your reporting that maybe folks don't appreciate about this crisis of care?
Yeah, so we look at gender, right? And I was an economy reporter long before I was at the 19th. That was my job when I started here in 2020. And because we look at gender, we look at women, we look at LGBTQ plus people, childcare started to emerge as one of those industries that we were just paying a lot of attention to because it's 94% women. It's
Hmm. Oh,
majority
in the employee base, right?
right. And so it was this industry that we were focusing a lot on. The very first story we published at the 19th was a story about how women were being affected by the pandemic more than men. And that had never really happened. But childcare was part of that story. It was a really significant part of the story. It was a significant part of why women were not going back to work, even as the jobs were returning.
Yeah.
And so for us, my role started to shift because of that. I didn't just become the economy reporter, I became the economy and childcare reporter because
Hmm.
childcare was such an economic issue that was affecting women way more than it was affecting men, and in a really substantial way. It was determining whether they were staying in their careers. It was pushing women out of the workforce long before they wanted to leave the workforce. I mean, people were talking to me about making these choices that were haunting them around, should I leave my job and take care of my child because there are no childcare options for me? And one of the things that came up a lot during, and I'm thinking of like 2020, 2021, those early years, was the idea of choice and how so many people were being stripped of that choice, whether it was the choice to remain in the workforce, whether it was the choice of what childcare I could put my child in, and what does that
Hmm.
when I can't choose who is going to care for the most precious thing in my life. That was a really salient and powerful thing that really stuck with me. Then I became a mom in 2022. So it became personal. I experienced it myself, and I'm pregnant again. Y'all, we're doing this again.
Oh.
But but you know, it is a really personal thing, and it is a thing that touches your life in really significant ways, from the way you budget to the way that you plan, from the way to the way you plan long term in your career.
Well, and stress and wellness, I think also for parents who are trying to cope with these like impossible situations. So just for those of you who have joined us live on the 2A, we definitely want to hear people's stories today. And you know, this is a good conversation to be participatory. So we'll open it up really soon, and would love to have all of you put your hands up early, and we'll get you in as soon as we can. I want to shift to the politics for a minute, because I think we all get it. This is like a really difficult and seemingly intractable issue. But I want to talk about two things in the politics. One is, and I guess for Reshma, and then Chabeli, I want you to talk a little bit about where you see there are some, I mean, some of the states are implementing some interesting laws to try to subsidize childcare costs for lower income families. But Reshma, you've been like on this mission to get both Harris and Trump to talk about childcare. If any of you did not see, I was thinking about playing the clip, but I think everyone's probably seen it, which is the question that Reshma Saujani asked of Donald Trump at the Economic Club meeting, and asked him about how specifically he was going to address the childcare shortage. And his answer, if you didn't see it, was rather unfocused and unclear, and had to do with tariffs. But then Reshma, it's also come up with Kamala Harris. So talk about the politics and like what you're hearing from both candidates, because ultimately you don't care. You just want something passed that makes sense, right? And we need both Republicans and Democrats to be focused on this if we're going to.
So when I started doing this work, the first thing I heard from people in Washington was that, listen, like the problem is childcare, paid leave. It's like number 13 on the list. Like it's not a priority. And so it's like it's never gonna happen. We kind of went through this when Biden was elected. Like everybody got everything except paid leave and childcare. And so it was clear to us at Moms First that we had to elevate the issue. And so about 6 months ago, we started.
But wait, Reshma, people don't know how close we were though on paid leave, right? Because you and I talked a lot about it when the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act passed, which was right at the end of the last Congress. There was this belief that we might be able to get paid leave done. And again, it didn't happen. And by the way, I just, as a point of personal privilege, the reason I started working on women's issues was because even when President Obama had both houses of Congress, oh, look, I'm being interrupted by my child.
Go for it.
Okay, I can't right now. Can you figure it out? I'm working.
Do you hear mine jumping up and down? I'm like, it's like they know, right? They're like, oh,
they know. This is like right on cue. I could not have cued this better. Something's wrong with the iPad. You're almost out of battery. Plug it in by my bed, please. Seriously. Okay.
My door.
There's a charger problem. I'm gonna apparently need to mute in a second and let you all discuss amongst yourselves. This is like perfectly on cue interruption. Anyway, we almost passed paid leave. Obama had both houses of Congress and never did it. This is like 35 years of it. Yeah. So please continue, Reshma.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because it always feels like there's one person or one thing. We're almost there. Da 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 da. And I just call a little bit of bullshit on that. So so we decided at Moms First about 6-7 months ago that we had got to get it elevated, at the presidential, in the debates. And we needed to get a commitment from each one of them that they were going to do something about it. Like we had to get childcare talked about like they were talking about immigration, in the economy, quite frankly, China, AI, whatever it was. It had
everything else except
it had to get elevated. So we started with a petition with the CNN debate to get to get it asked. We went on a media campaign, and I cannot tell you like how important it is for reporters like you, Chabeli, right? That like it was all these also female journalists, I feel like, who were moms who just also elevated the issue, and kept writing about it. And right, I mean, if you look back, right, 3 years ago, right, even pre-pandemic, nobody was really writing about childcare, talking about childcare in the way that we were now. So I think it was this very kind of concerted effort to like get it in get it in the media, because quite frankly, you can have a handful of moms asking a question at a town hall, but I think politicians listen to what journalists and what, quite frankly, people are saying in the news. And so we got the question asked in the debate. And then, I'm on the board of the Economic Club of New York. They had invited Donald Trump to come speak. Tradition is they asked 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans to speak. It's the first week of school. I am exhausted. I get a call on like Monday being like, would you like to ask Donald Trump a question? And I was like, I sure would. And I was like, yeah, I'd like to ask my question on childcare. And they're like, great. So my team and I of like 6 moms were like, okay, what should we ask? How do we ask it? And how do we ask it in a way that like solicits an answer, right? And we worked on that, crafted it. The event was on Thursday. Thursday was the first day of school for my kids. First day of school for pre-K for my son, Sai. I'm at the school at 8:30. I didn't read the email that I was supposed to like walk in and sit with him. It's 9:15. I got to be in Midtown, at 10:30. My son's looking at me and I'm like, baby, I gotta go. And he's like, fine, run home, put my suit on, get to the place, I'm the last person to go to ask the question. And I asked
It's amazing.
And he
Did you know it was going to go so viral? Like, did you think, I mean, listen, in fairness,
honestly,
he
I
really was
didn't.
trying to answer the
Lauren, I
question.
didn't. Like, I didn't. Like,
You didn't think.
look, I could have, me. I was surprised they even let me ask the question, right? Because I
Yeah.
have known how to make it go, ask something in a way, you know what I mean, that could go viral, like crazy mom, right? But I just asked a really simple question. And I think when I walked off the stage, I was like, oh, I was proud that I got him to say something, right? That we actually got him to say something. And then immediately when we walked off, it was clear. And then,
It was blowing up.
helped push
Yeah.
it a little, right? But yeah, it was extraordinary. And then,
Okay.
honestly, I think the VP debate to me was one of the most profound moments in my career.
Yeah.
Because like to have, again, these 2 female journalists ask the question and keep asking it, right? About what they're going to do about childcare and paid leave. And, and for them both to essentially commit. And remember, Lauren, before the Trump question, neither of the parties had actually put childcare on their platform.
Wow.
And even Kamala Harris, right? She added the 7%, all the childcare stuff after that.
Yeah. Well,
So,
it's amazing, and you do deserve a lot of credit.
no,
for
listen, I don't deserve God bless.
Oh, just take it.
God bless me with a big mouth. You know what I mean? And
Credit,
Right. Yeah.
so,
No,
like,
I got it.
But it is this whole point. Like, I think there's so many so many advocates that have been fighting for this for like 50 years.
I know, for years.
Since Nixon.
Right. I mean, my mom was advocating for this in the 70s. So, I mean, everyone understood that this was going to be the issue that would keep women from being
right. Yeah. I think the thing that was missing that was the narrative change that I think we've had that we've had in this case, right? The media, like the elevation of the issue with the media.
Yeah. No, I mean, you told me that from the beginning, and I was like, maybe, I don't know, but you were 100% right. So, Chabeli, let's talk. We have a bunch of people who want to get in on the conversation. We're going to bring them in a second. I'm going to start with Sharon because she had her hand up first, so we can bring Sharon in. But Chabeli, what are we seeing around the country? Because there have been it's a bunch of women governors. But we are seeing some progress in terms of states trying to make progress on capping the cost of childcare, investing in some childcare infrastructure. Universal pre-K is also part of that, right? That's one of the issues that that has gained a lot of steam. But where are you seeing signs of hope? Give us a little view of that, and then we'll bring Sharon into the conversation.
Yeah, so I should say if we could pan out a little bit, there was some federal investment in childcare over the past 4 years, $39 billion, which, to put it into context for you, we spend about $8-9 billion in childcare right now annually. So a $39 billion investment, really huge. Now, that money went out to the states to help stabilize programs after the pandemic or during the pandemic, and to help improve wages. After that happened, so that money, the last little bit of it ended this week. After that happened, we started to see states realize, like, hey, here's what happens when we invest in this system. And here are the dividends that it's paying, right? centers were able to stay open. They were able to retain their workers. They were able to lower costs for families. And so we had something like 11 states that started to put extra state funding into childcare between 2021 and 2023 and 24 now. So we are starting to see some of that investment. I mean, the most significant is New Mexico. We need to talk about New Mexico. They had a ballot measure that was approved by 70% of voters, and it created the first permanent childcare fund. That is dedicated funding for childcare. It is really, really significant. And one of the big things that it did was that it made more families eligible for childcare funding, right? So right now, a lot of the way that it's structured is low-income families get some help in terms of their childcare funds, but New Mexico expanded it to something like 70% of families get access.
It's amazing. I mean, I heard that because I interviewed the New Mexico governor during the Chicago, during the DNC. I was interviewing her and my governor, Kathy Hochul, and I made a joke about I was going to move to New Mexico, and my New York governor was very upset with me.
Well, I mean, New York has done
my joke went over like a lead balloon, but
New
New York
York
is doing a lot as well.
too. Yeah, New York has Minnesota. Governor Walz should have talked about this at the debate. He didn't mention.
It's funny that he didn't. Right, that Minnesota's done it.
They invested 1.3 billion over 4 years.
That was really weird.
That was a really
right. Like, why didn't he do that? I don't know. He wasn't his finest. Let's be honest.
Right.
Well, I don't know.
So we have Walz. We have Vermont has a payroll tax that is helping to fund and improve childcare. And part of that payroll tax was employers saying, hey, tax us. We want this. Our workers need to have childcare so that they could come to work, right?
Well, and I'll add in New York, like along those lines with employers, and then I want to bring in Sharon, is that in New York, one of the interesting things that Governor Hochul did was that when they brought Micron and some other big employers to upstate New York, they required that they build on-site childcare facilities.
That's from CHIPS, right? That's Peter Munda's leadership, which has been extraordinary.
Right. That's a really good point, Reshma. I sort of forgot that was part of the CHIPS Act. That, which people don't know, is that the CHIPS Act required that if you got federal funds through CHIPS, that you had to have a childcare investments, right?
And that's these big semiconductor, factories. You want to build it, you had to give your workers childcare, which is also
amazing.
Sort of the way that childcare has kind of gone into these different policies.
Right. Powerful.
Okay, so Sharon, what's your question? Let's bring in Sharon. And where are you, Sharon? And tell us what we double unmuted you. Sorry. Let me unmute you. Okay.
So I'm in South Carolina. My question is, I guess, also to think of being more creative and not just a child care center. When my sister had young kids and I went back to college, I needed to get a part-time job. She needed some part-time help, but we sort of found ways to do creative compensation, because if we did it legally, like I did a 1099, she would have to double what she was going to pay me, because the government was just going to tax the hell out of you. And she couldn't have me as an employee. And I think even if families want to help out, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And I mean, I helped out my sister for 4 years when I was in nursing school, but like I said, creative compensation, because there was no affordable way to do it, having to do either payroll tax or a 1099. And
so Sharon, can I ask you a question? First of all, I'm so glad you're here, and thanks for sharing your story. How much does childcare affect your vote in 24? Is it an issue that's like, have you been thinking about it relative to the candidates and what you think of them in terms of how they've responded on these issues?
I think for me, it's more of a local, like my state level, and then my House and Senate representative. I'm really opposed to any executive action for fixing problems, because they just seem to get reversed. And
meaning
so
federal.
it needs to go through Congress, and I think the states need to get involved, because what works for people down here in South Carolina I'm from Washington State. completely different situation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't think everything is a federal fix everything.
Well,
So
thanks for
I
that.
do
I
look
think
at
that's a
it
great
from the
perspective.
local, who's running for the House seat and in the
Right.
state legislatures.
Although I don't know if you realize, I didn't really realize until Chabeli was saying it, just how much of the money that the states use to subsidize things like that, it really comes from the federal government. Like a state like South Carolina would have trouble raising, unless I guess if they did a payroll tax of some kind, right?
But
Chabeli, do
that's
you want
where
to
I
take
think,
that?
but that's where I think the government is so short-sighted. I think there are a lot of, I don't need childcare now, or nor does my sister, but when we were kids and grew up, you had the neighbor lady across the street that would be more than happy to watch us for a few hours until my mom got off work, and she'd throw her a few bucks and it was no big deal. You can't do that nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd love to weigh in on this, and thank you
Thank
for
you so much, Sharon. Yeah, we'll go
Thanks.
to, just so we're ready, we're going to go to Diane next. But please, Chabeli, respond. Go ahead.
This has been something that's come up a lot. In particular, Vance has talked about this a lot, this idea of how do we incentivize different forms of childcare. And I should say the mechanism that we currently have for it in sort of the way that it's officially written does apply to family, friend, and neighbor care, some of these more informal methods that you're talking about. My grandmother was an in-home childcare provider my entire life. So I lived this personally and I saw it. I think so much of the conversation that we're hearing, particularly from Republicans and Vance, is this idea of how do we improve these different methods and focus there. And certainly, I think that's an area that does need some attention, right? We hear a lot from these providers of there's a lot of red tape. It's really difficult. It's not as easy as it should be. And that's one method, but that is one piece of a larger system that
Mm-hmm.
does need some of that investment. Like, like Lauren was saying, federal government funds it, goes to the states put in some. States have really tiny, really, really tiny offices that are dealing with childcare. It is something that without sort of this larger investment, we can't fix all of the little pieces all around,
Yeah.
margins, right? All the different forms of care and how to improve that kind of care.
And I was just going to add, and then I want to bring Diane into the conversation. Elder care too, I might add, is another piece of this, right? You have very similar kinds of issues, which is lack of infrastructure for elder care, a lot of unpaid care, especially in families of color. Oh, good. We have another
I'm going
little
to just say one thing
person.
to that, but I think what Sharon's point is really important because I think that when we get to a place where there is some sort of bipartisan work on childcare, this idea of choice is going to be really, really important in getting bipartisan support for whatever solution it is. So
Yeah, I love that.
Thanks.
Okay, Diane, where are you? And there's a cutie in the background. I guess
Yeah.
your kid is also wanting to get their iPad charged, like mine was standing here crying 5 minutes ago because she can't find the charger. That was like an epic fail in my planning. Hi.
They are always right on cue. We're from Iowa. One that's almost 6, one that's almost 2, and a 6-month-old.
Oh my God, you are in it.
Childcare is completely unaffordable for us. I was previously working during the pandemic, and until just after this one was born, as a nurse inpatient in a hospital. I worked night shifts on the weekends. And my husband also does shift work, works in a factory. So I guess my question is I never really had a good option for childcare because most of the centers, they close around 6:30. And there's really no way as a nurse inpatient to get your child picked up at that time. And my husband's still at work now. So for families who are more like middle class, lower middle class, shift work is a big part of our life.
Yeah.
Not something a lot of politicians think about, but there's literally nowhere to take your kids. So I guess creative childcare options would be helpful. My parents live in Cook County, Illinois, and during the pandemic on 3 occasions I had to drive my oldest child, he was my only one at the time, to Chicago to come back to go to work and then just leave him there the weekend and then go pick him up just to bring him back. It was crazy. But it would have been nice, certainly for emergency situations to have like someone I could trust who had like, their background check done and had CPR and all these things that didn't cost a fortune through like care.com, where you have these, basically like middleman things going on. So, and then the other thing I wanted to talk about was after had my second one, I was a stay-at-home mom by that point because childcare was just impossible. And also I kind of wanted to take that time with my kids, but when I went to have my youngest child, I was pregnant. I had a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I wanted my husband to be able to be with me. And it's very hard to get like a babysitter for when you go into labor because
Oh my goodness.
don't know when that's going to happen. So I just had a lot of insecurity and uncertainty about like if I was going to be by myself. And luckily a friend does shift work too. So, she was super tired. It was kind of crazy, but it worked out because I had like, just lucked out basically. But those are some of the issues, I guess, that seem like in my my kind of community, those are like more of the issues. Isn't necessarily like, trying to juggle working from home or
Right.
Finding
to
it.
necessarily even just be able to find somebody. Yeah.
I know. And that overnight shift piece is such a huge part of it. I mean, yes, like there's just so many huge holes in the system. Like that just doesn't even really exist. There was some great reporting a few years ago too about like folks who work, especially in some of the chain stores, chain restaurants that were there was like a computer program that was generating people's shifts, and it was causing huge problems for parents with young kids because they not only was it crazy shifts, it was like they didn't even know in advance, and they were getting asked to show up for like a 10 o'clock at night shift like the day before. And there was some really good reporting, and some of the companies wound up changing it because it was just so impossible. Like, what do? You find out 5 hours before that you have to show up at 10 o'clock at night, and who's watching your kids? But Chabeli, what are you hearing about this? Because that overnight shift, I mean, I'm sure you'd prefer not to work overnight, but for nurses, your point is, that's your job.
Well, to the point
It's
that
such a great point. Thanks, Diane. Like, we love hearing from you. So great.
To the point that Sharon was making earlier about sort of these different creative models, a lot of in-home care providers are oftentimes the folks that are really stepping in and helping families that are working the shift work or odd hours. I just talked to an in-home childcare provider in Connecticut last week who, she said, she's like, I'm starting at 5:30 now because that's when the parents need to drop off their kid. Most daycares are not open that early. And I'm working all the way until 6:37 because that's the time they're going to pick them up, right? And so like these providers are really critical in the system, particularly for parents that are working some of these odd hours, but they are not getting support. They're not getting talked to by politicians. They're not getting named in some of this legislation. So what she was telling me was, I feel missed in this larger childcare conversation because so much of it is still talking about center-based care versus other, even though some of these large bills have said, we want to make sure that we're incentivizing different kinds of care models, but it just isn't at the forefront of the conversation yet.
And our electeds need to know this stuff. Go ahead, Reshma.
I think the thing is, and thank you so much, Diane, for your point, because I think we hear a lot of these stories at Moms First. We have over 1.1 million members, so many of them, and the teachers, you know what I mean, who we're not even talking about, like, and I think you have to always build almost for the most vulnerable, right? And figure out how do you fix the system for them. And I think the reality is like, I think for a lot of the folks that are like, Childcare, or a lot of these folks, they're organized, they got lobbyists, they got money, right? And so they're going to build a child model that works for them. So it's really important that moms across, low income, middle income, we all need to bond together to figure out
and speak up
and say, what are the creative models that work for us? Like if you were going to design it for yourself, what would that, quite frankly, look like? I live in New York City, I have 2 babysitters, right? And like, they don't have licenses, but they're like, they're like my heart, my soul, you know what I mean? And if the current—
Your sister wives, I used to joke my nanny was my sister wife.
But Lauren, if the current proposal passed, we would not benefit from it. So
right.
Oh, was someone jumping in?
Dan, was that you? Yeah, go ahead,
Guys,
Diane.
there's another thing I wanted to add is just one of the things that I get a little bit concerned about with this is we don't like want to be left out. We'd like to be able to have, like you said, like the choice to work, but what would be worse than that would be to have like the federal government subsidizing this, the ability for people who have more regular work hour jobs to be able to have a second income. Because like right now we're a single income and it is really difficult. Obviously with 202, the childcare thing is just not workable in terms of what I would make as a nurse, but it would almost be worse to me if the option was, well, if you had just gotten a job that was more suitable to the legislation that we were working out,
Yeah.
you know, because it's
No, it has to make sense.
That's why I think so many of these things are tied together. Like, for example, like women should have the choice. If you want to stay home for a couple of years, take care of your kids, you should be able to, and you should be able to re-enter the workforce without penalty, right? We don't make it possible for you to, quite frankly, be a devoted mother and do your career on your terms, right? And so we have to build a system and a model that works for what, quite frankly, women and families want, and that's going to help them thrive. And so, but I think it means, like, my advice to all of us, first join moms first, but my advice to all of us is that we got to get organized and mobilized. I think that we're going to have a once in a lifetime opportunity to pass childcare in America. I think there's going to be a lot of debates, a lot of conversation in 2025, and we need to make sure that just a certain group of interest groups, even if they're part of my party, you know what I mean, don't get to actually build a system that doesn't work for the vast majority of people, right? So we have to build it together.
I was just going to add to that, and I want to bring Amy into the conversation. Diane, you're awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so thrilled. And Amy, I wanted to go to you, and I want to make sure we get one guy in for sure before we close today. So David's going to get probably the last word, because this is a family issue. It's not just a women's issue, even if we mostly have women on today's program. Amy, I want to go to you, but I just want to emphasize for everyone, these are exactly the kinds of detail, the specifics of what Diane is going through, that lawmakers actually really need to know. Diane, even if you have 20 minutes, which you probably don't, if you have 10 minutes sometime this month, send an email to your member of Congress or your senator about what you need to make childcare work. That kind of stuff really does matter. They need to hear from women about this. So Amy, you have the floor.
Thank you.
Where are you, first of all?
I'm in Virginia, but I've been working on childcare since 1999 in every state.
Oh, good for you. Thank you.
Yeah. Primarily Head Start and Early Head Start, which is the system for kids living and families living below poverty, both working, but not extensively that. And I will say that it's such a huge intractable issue for a number of reasons. We want a variety of methods, like Sharon and Diane were saying, but I think what we've learned over time is that, the overwhelming majority of what you'll ever learn, you'll learn before you're 4. So we want these not only to be affordable environments, but also high quality environments.
Yeah.
So we don't want to go with the lowest cost solution. When I was looking with a girlfriend of mine who was pregnant 30 years ago in Louisiana, their ratio for infants was 7-1, which the American Academy of Pediatrics at that time said was essentially abuse. If you were in charge of 7 infants yourself as an adult, that was doing harm. Even if you weren't doing harm, that was doing harm.
Now is 4-1.
4-1.
Is that what
yes,
it is?
It is
Chabeli,
different,
is that
but what
federal require? Is that a federal requirement?
In Head Start and Early Head Start, it's 4-1. Arlington, until they rolled it back, was 3-1, which was better than that. But to go for a full working day to support working families to get to work and to come back, you need 2.75 workers to staff that. Those hours to be open. And if you want them not to be living in poverty and not to be, which they are legit.
The childcare workers are.
Yes. And they don't have childcare. I mean, it's just crazy. You have to think about these things. So, and I will also say that Linda Smith from NRECA has been great on the topic of talking about facilities. Not only do we have to invest in the workers, we have to invest in safe
Where are they
facilities.
working?
Yes.
Wait, can I
improved
ask you a question
systems.
since you brought that up? And then
Sure.
I'm sorry to be a little rushy.
Yep,
I want
nope.
to make sure we end and so we don't lose Reshma. But just a question for you, like, do you think, and this is, we've had a lot of people on the call already sort of say that they have discomfort generally with the federal government getting involved. Is there any way to create a living wage for childcare workers without it being subsidized by the government?
No, it is not. It is not possible.
It's not possible.
It
Because
is
families
not,
can't afford to pay
and the
what it would
states
cost.
won't do it, haven't done it, and can't afford it. Like, no, that's a pipe dream. And no.
So I think I just want to put a pin in that, because I think it's actually, like, when we talk about these things, like, it's a really, I mean, I think we can all appreciate folks being having discomfort with, government intervention. But there is a broken, there's a problem with the structure, right?
There's an
there's
economy
no
of
way,
scale.
right? So let's just say that again, in most places in America, it's not possible for families to afford what it would cost to pay the childcare workers a living wage.
So, and I'll just also
right?
say, yes. And I'll close with this. I think it's interesting that we are like broadly like a white group of women having this conversation. Women of color have been on this and not at all surprised by this for 50, 60, 70 years. And just like we get more press time when like white women talk about this, I would also say that men have to talk about this. Men and dads, this cannot be a women's issue.
Yeah.
It can't be a mom issue. Like, it cannot be that.
It's all
this is
of our
an American worker, an American issue.
Okay, so when is Amy running for Congress? That's my question.
Oh,
Amy, you have an amazing stump speech. You're amazing, Amy. Thank you for coming on. Like, that was, we just all got a master class. You're amazing. This is the best thing about two-way. It's like, you just never know what kind of brilliant expert is going to show up. But since you called out our colleagues from needing to be, also our male colleagues from participating, I got to ask David to weigh in. I think I can see you, David. Amy, you're amazing. Thank you for being on two-way. Come back. We'll be around. I love having you on the show. So David, you're going to get the last question / comment. Where are you, David? Hi, David. Where are you? Tell us what's on your mind.
I feel like I'm infiltrating you. I'm actually from Sweden.
You're not at all. You're in Sweden. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Who called the guy
whole other world
to come and tell us about how life could be if we lived in Sweden?
Exactly.
Oh my God.
That's partially because once I think I've been watching two-way mostly because of the horse race. I'm very fascinated about how it can be so close and those kind of things. But now when I saw this episode was about childcare, that's one of those issues, I think, coming from a country where we have free childcare, that is the most mind-boggling thing, like why that is not a case, because like how much it can help the economy and how much it helps freedom for women especially. And I think in Sweden, it was one of the things that really like had the whole revolution of bringing women into the workforce, and it really stimulated the economy in an amazing way. So we have both free childcare, we have and night care. We have 80% sick leave if you need to be home with your child.
You're torturing us, David. Seriously.
Yeah.
You had to come on from Sweden, of all the countries, to tell us about all the ways in which life is amazing in Sweden for working women. Thank you so much. And for the working men, because yes, you do pay very high taxes.
So I think it's yeah. But and then we have a lot of other things. Yeah, I don't have to go through all this.
I know, you're torturing us. But listen, it's an important point. And I think, look, we Americans do kind of know generally that the Nordic countries, especially Sweden, have amazing policies on this. But, I started the show by saying it's choice. And what many of the countries that have very progressive childcare, they understood that it was an economic benefit, right? That, I have to unmute Reshma, sorry. But that it was an economic benefit that would make the economy grow, that the money that you spend on childcare as the government comes back because it enables higher productivity and workforce participation from families. And also, just one other thing about Sweden, it's all gender neutral. So what's really cool about the Swedish policies, and if you've ever, I think there's a 60 Minutes about it if you haven't seen it, but that the men have equal entitlement and are equally encouraged to take paid leave and to benefit from these policies. And so, it's sort of destigmatized. Is that right, David?
Yeah, my dad was one of the first fathers in Sweden, actually, that went out with a stroller and had childcare. His male employees, male colleagues at that point was like, "You're abusing the system. Why do you use this?" But yeah, this was like 45 years ago.
But now it's totally. But now it's common, right? Now it's common.
Yeah, now it's even like if you take out. I think if still women take out more than men do, and we have some portion of it that's mandatory for each parent. So a woman can take everything, and man has to take some of it, and then we have some of it that is voluntary that you can pick and choose. So yeah, but it's
cool.
It's really looked upon that you should equalize it in most. It should be equal between the parents in most.
Amazing. Well, thanks for coming from a kind of late in the evening in Sweden. I'm glad you're following two-way. We never know who's going to be here. It's the best thing about what we do. It's so much fun. Oh, and now we have the baby too. Yay. Diane's got the baby. Reshma, I know we said we were going to let you go a little bit early. Do you want to get the sort of last word in? And we could clearly do this for a lot longer. This was such a good show today.
I definitely don't feel like I don't know if I have a last word. I mean, I think it's so great that we're having this conversation. And I think the point is that there's a lot of work to do, right? In figuring out a solution that really works for everybody, and that there isn't really a one size fits all, solution that's going to work for every single family. So I think we need to have one. We need to build one. We need to be innovative, creative. Quite frankly, I was with my friend Jacinda Ardern, and what they've done in New Zealand, they've done really creative things. And I think the moment for all of us kind of in this space is to start looking at other models and figuring out what can work, because the bottom line is childcare in America, it's like a broken business model, right? And that's why the government has to step in, if it's ever going to be fixed.
Reshma, we have some folks in the chat who are asking how they can reach out to you and join Moms First.
Sign up to be part of the motherhood at momsfirst.us. We're a bipartisan organization fighting for childcare and paid leave.
And if you're not following Chabeli's amazing reporting at the 19th, please do. She's tagged in all of our socials for the show. And really, it's such great reporting.
God's work.
So I mean, really, it's so important. Really but this is such an awesome show. We're going to keep talking about this. And I think we should come back and have this conversation again after the election, because I think, the sort of then what, regardless of who wins, you gave me some real sense of optimism, Reshma, that, maybe we're at a tipping point. And you know what, JD Vance said, he has a working wife and a hardworking wife with kids at home. And, my hope is that, both Republicans and Democrats maybe can come together on this one. Maybe that's optimistic, but we have on some key issues before.
Yeah, about China, so we should on childcare.
I agree. So anyway, what an awesome show. Chabeli, Reshma, thank you. And thanks to everyone in the audience. We will have another Majority Rules show next week. Not exactly sure when, so I'll let you know. We're going to be doing some more deep dives like this on other issues germane to the election in these last, 36 days leading up to to election day. So
before we hang up, I want to tell you hopeful that regardless of who's elected, that we could get better childcare. I want to know what you think.
This question of whether we are at a tipping point, I think we are. I think partly by a lot of your work, the fact that we got it into debates, the fact that we have candidates sparring over who has the higher child tax credit proposal, like the fact that we're talking about it. I think we're at a moment, and it's actually a story I was writing earlier today that we're going to publish, is this idea of parents as a voting bloc, talking to parents about the issues that affect them. And if we do that, can we move people? And if we do that, can we move policy? And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more parents in elected office. We're seeing them advocate for this. We're seeing parents advocating for it on the ground. And all of that matters. So I think this is the election where that changes. I hope it is.
Amazing. Yeah, as my grandmother would say, since it is Rosh Hashanah, I'm going to say something very Jewish to close this out. From your lips to God's ears. That's what we say in my family. So anyway, ladies,
on your second babe and your number 2.
Oh my God, yes. Wait, when are you due?
January 1st, y'all.
No way. Oh, New Year's baby. Oh, okay. Well, That's wonderful. So great. Thank you all for this great conversation. I love these. They're so fun. Thanks to everyone who came out. Tell your friends. This will be up on the Two-Way YouTube page. Send it around because this is a good one. So anyway, thank you all. Thanks for being here. We'll be back with you next week. I'm Lauren Leader. This is Majority Rules. Thank you so much for being with us.